It's a concept to contemplate for the new year, and that is pleasure, power, and meaning, and the relationship between the three things as we move through different stages in life. So the first thing to think about is why we seek pleasure in general, regular circumstances. And the underlying reason is usually freedom. So a person can work really hard at their job, and then on the weekend they might want to have drinks with their friends. In the evenings they might want to watch their favorite show. Some people reach for their favorite foods when they're stressed out. Some people want to go shopping even if they don't have something specific that they need to get. So these are little ways that we seek pleasure generally. And it's usually a reach for kind of de-stressing, not overthinking things, wanting to feel good, wanting a dopamine hit. And it's generally not a bad thing. It's just a regular part of life. It's part of being in this dimension and having life experience. And why we seek power is generally for status. So a person might apply for a better position at work. They might switch to a different company where they get more pay for the kind of work that they like to do. And this just gives us goals. It gives us something to reach for. It might motivate us to wake up in the morning and be enthusiastic about our day. So what happens when meaning is missing is we can often end up in addictive behavior. And for some, it turns into a life of pleasure or a life of power seeking. So for a life of pleasure seeking, it's common that a person might party for decades instead of going through it when they're young and then moving on to another stage. They might still be partying in their 40s and their 50s and their 60s. And sometimes people who move down that path, they may not have serious relationships, they may not have kids, or they might have kids and then they might not take care of their kids. They might have work that has less responsibility. They might have living situations that are a little bit more precarious. And when we're young, it doesn't seem harmful to go down that kind of path. But then sometimes people, as they're getting older, they realize that when they were young, they were having fun or they were rebelling. And then as they're getting older, they're not feeling as much pleasure as they used to. They're not rebelling against anything. They just realize that they're not investing in the things that really matter. And they've been avoiding responsibility for so long that it can be challenging to really feel that there's a way, like there's a better way, or they might give up and just keep pleasure seeking and decide that there's really no reason to go back or to try to do something different because they've already chosen this. And this can be a really big struggle once a person is older and they didn't realize when they were young how responsibility shapes a person, how it can help a person have more integrity, how it can help a person develop a better character, and just learn their own capability. Like, taking on responsibility teaches us what we're capable of. It teaches us how strong we are, how focused we can be, how disciplined we can be, how relentless we can be. And it shows us our strength and our power that's inside. And sometimes if we avoid that, if we avoid taking on responsibility, then we don't ever realize our power, we don't ever realize our strength. And when we start to think about it and maybe have regrets or maybe just not feel as good as we used to feel pleasure seeking, then it can be an overwhelming experience. So similarly with a life of power, where a person gets into that path and then they end up going down that path and focusing on that and getting carried away with it. So in the beginning, it can seem harmless and a person can just be striving for better, they can have goals, and then if they get sucked into that mindset where power becomes really important and they keep climbing, that person can end up using their power in an abusive way. They can end up using their power at work to bully people. They can end up being physically abusive to their partner, to their children. They can end up being sexually abusive to people, where they want, like, when it gets out of hand and they want to take that type of power from people, and they've kind of entered an even darker place. And so when we seek a life of power, the momentum builds and things can get darker and darker to the point where we wake up one day and realize that even that like the people that are around, maybe they're not there for the right reasons. Like a person can have status and power, but then their friends aren't their real friends. Their marriage partner didn't marry them for the right reasons. Their kids don't like them. There's all of these layers of things that can happen where the person has lost connection to intimacy. And instead of healing at that point, a lot of people end up getting meaner because there's a desperation that forms where they realize that if people wake up and desire a life of connection and intimacy that are around them, that they'll leave. And so the person ends up getting meaner to try and make people afraid to leave and just entering like another layer of power dynamic, because they also have gotten to that space where they feel like, oh, it's too late. I've already made all these mistakes, and now connection and intimacy isn't possible. So those are two streams that can pull us without us realizing what's happening at a pretty young age if we don't stop to self-reflect. And for most people are not going to be pulled into an entire life of pleasure or an entire life of power. Most people are not going to sacrifice all responsibility or all connection and intimacy. Most people will go through stages where they were pleasure-seeking or power-seeking and eventually get to a place where they do reflect and they do want meaning, and they are able to see some meaning already emerging or some patterns and themes. And what we want to do when we start emotionally maturing in this space is asking ourselves, when we reach for pleasure, when we reach for power, where is it really coming from? And this will help us have like a greater understanding of our current life as well as the meaning that is possible looking backwards and going forwards. So for many people, they might realize looking backwards, looking at childhood, looking at teenagehood, that they were inclined to pleasure seek because they weren't allowed to be a kid when they were a kid, or they weren't allowed to be a teenager when they were a teenager. So if they didn't get to feel enough good emotions, if they didn't get to feel enough pleasure when they were growing up, then as an adult they might run after that, or feel that that's something desirable to experience is pleasure in excessive states or in excessive ways. And recognizing that maybe we didn't get to feel all of the childhood feelings that we wanted to feel, or all the teenage feelings that we wanted to feel, that's a very good thing to reflect and recognize that, because then we can bring more meaning to our decisions as a young adult. We can see where things are coming from, we can understand better. And the same thing with power. We might have had our power taken away from us when we were children or teenagers, where there's some people that are physically abused or some people that are sexually abused. And while those are really common experiences and really common drives towards power when people are older, There's also a type of person who can be very well protected and safe growing up, but their power was taken away from them because while they were growing up, their family already had like an idea of what university they would go to, the type of person that they would marry. And so that person, even though they might have been really protected and had a nice childhood, they still didn't experience autonomy because there was this underlying current of what type of person they were going to be when they were older, and not striving for that would be some kind of disappointment to their family. So people can end up pleasure seeking and power seeking for all sorts of reasons, who come from all walks of life. And when we can reflect on these things and have an understanding of where our inclinations came from, then we can let go of judgment for ourselves and also for other people. So as we move into this stage of wanting a life of more meaning, of investing in meaning, we'll stop being bothered by other people who are pleasure seeking around us, in families, in offices, or who are power seeking. And we'll stop taking it so personally once we reflect on our own behavior and where it has come from and emerged from so far. So the last stage for this is just embracing the dance. So we might still engage in power seeking and pleasure seeking, where we are investing in meaning, but we're still a human and we're still having these experiences. And it can come from a much deeper place. So if we are seeking power, if we are seeking leadership, status, it will be to elevate other people. It will be to help people, to guide people, to support people. It will be to mentor young people. It will be to uplift as many people as possible and be fully self-expressed as an individual human and have a soul experience of leadership and of life. And then with pleasure, we can bring pleasure into situations that are more meaningful. So for example, if we love a certain kind of cake, then it's not just about eating the cake and getting a dopamine hit. We might invite some people that we're close to over so that we can have tea and cake and we can enjoy conversation. So that's when we start bringing pleasure and power into a more meaningful place, and we're paying attention to the undercurrent of what's happening, not just the superficial surface reasons that we do things, but we want to connect to the deeper, the soul of a room, the soul of a situation, the soul of a habit. We want to bring pleasure and power into a more meaningful place and invest in meaning in every major area of life, so that moving forward, we are acting more consciously and we are entering a more emotionally mature state. It's just an important thing for us to contemplate so that we can start the year off more mindfully and we can process this last year more mindfully. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below, and I'm sending you lots of blessings from Toronto.